Entertainment and advertising are two major pillars of U.S. culture, and the lines that divide them have blurred considerably since the widespread introduction of commercial television in the 1940s. As the industry grew, advertisers gradually stepped up their game, pumping billions of dollars into ad campaigns that felt like movies, and inserting product placements into films and TV programs to promote their brands. One particular ad campaign would break new ground in this field by specifically targeting children, and would not only result in a lawsuit that would help redefine the interpretation of copyright law, but also help create a massive conglomerate that would dominate its industry for decades. Richard and Maurice McDonald were brothers who migrated to California from New Hampshire during the Great Depression, finding work in Hollywood as set builders at Columbia Pictures and opening a movie theater in Glendale that went bust. The brothers eventually opened a drive-in restaurant in San Bernardino, the McDonald Brothers Burger Bar Drive-In, which made them rich and enabled them to pioneer the first fast food restaurant as they developed a system of preparing food that increased speed, lowered costs, and raised sales by condensing the menu to a select few items. Their offerings consisted of burgers, fries, and shakes, and assembly line principles were applied to the cooking process, enabling faster preparation. Richard designed what would become the company's trademark golden arches as an attempt to make the building more visible from the road, and a worldwide brand in the making was born. In 1954, Ray Kroc entered the picture. As a salesman who had sold the McDonald brothers milkshake mixers, Kroc was amazed by the system that the brothers had developed, and convinced them to sell him the right to franchise the restaurants nationwide. Kroc also understood the value of marketing, and was even known to tell friends and associates that he didn't work in the restaurant business, but rather in show business. Kroc believed that focusing the business's marketing campaigns on children would be the most effective strategy, as a child who enjoyed McDonald's commercials was likely to bring in adult patrons as well. McDonald's first mascot was a hamburger-headed chef named Speedy, later renamed Archie to avoid confusion with Alka-Seltzer's mascot, and the character can still be seen on the facades of older McDonald's locations. However, the company would strike gold in 1965 with the introduction of a character that would single-handedly transform the face of advertising and permanently blur the line between marketing and entertainment. Oscar Goldstein was the owner of a McDonald's restaurant in Washington, D.C., and was also a sponsor of the popular local children's show, Bozo's Circus. Bozo had made an appearance at the location which drew in huge crowds, so when the show was canceled in 1963, Goldstein jumped on the opportunity to hire its star, Willard Scott, to design a new clown for the specific purpose of making restaurant appearances. After coining the name Ronald McDonald and working with an ad agency to develop the costume, Scott portrayed Ronald, the hamburger-happy clown, in a series of 3 television commercials which were launched by the McDonald's Corporation nationwide. However, Scott's tenure as the clown was short-lived, as corporate executives deemed him too overweight to continue playing the part. He was soon replaced by Michael Poliakovs, who filled the role until 1968, while Ray Rayner took the reins from 1968 to 1969. It was around this time that the clown evolved into the recognizable figure he is today, garnished with a yellow jumpsuit, striped shirt, and red shoes. However, it was King Moody's portrayal of Ronald, which began in 1969, that would embed itself in the subconscious of an entire generation. In 1970, the McDonald's Corporation enlisted advertising agency Needham, Harper & Steers to create a new ad campaign targeting children. Thus, McDonaldland was born, with its first TV commercial airing in 1971.
Follow Ronald McDonald through the land of apple pie trees, and don't be surprised if you meet Big Mac and Big Cheese.
McDonaldland was an imaginary universe populated by McDonald's menu items, which manifested in the form of characters, landmarks, or plants, with the restaurant serving as the main attraction. The ad campaign was known for its psychedelic rock soundtrack, and the main theme song was performed by singer-songwriter and former Buddy Holly bandmate Sonny Curtis, who also wrote and performed the theme song to the Zeitgeist sitcom The Mary Tyler Moore Show. An entire cast of characters supplementing Ronald were introduced, including Officer Big Mac and Mayor McCheese, who were frequently at odds with adversaries Captain Crook and Hamburglar, as they plotted to steal filet-o-fishes and hamburgers respectively. The character of Grimace was initially portrayed as an antagonist to Ronald and his young friends, though he soon evolved into an amiable companion. Another tentpole character, the Professor, was originally depicted as a second-tier personality before receiving a more prominent role. As a tie-in with the television commercials, playlands were added to many of McDonald's locations, often featuring kiddie attractions based on McDonaldland characters. The ad campaign was a huge success, and in 1972, McDonald's surpassed $1 billion in annual sales for the first time. Many innovations came to fruition during this era, including a breakfast menu and drive-through windows, as well as gift certificates for the holiday season. While other companies simply had mascots, McDonald's had created an entire universe around its products, and CEO Ray Kroc was reportedly extremely competitive with his rivals, one of which was the Walt Disney Company. Kroc and Walt Disney were born within 1 year of one another, spending both of their formative years in Illinois. They had coincidentally served in the same unit during World War I, and there was talk of McDonald's having a presence in Disneyland, although the deal fell through before the park's 1955 opening. At one point, Kroc even planned on buying 1,500 acres of land north of Los Angeles to build a cowboy-themed amusement park entitled Western World, though pragmatic company executives eventually talked him out of it. Nonetheless, by the mid-70s, Ronald and the rest of the McDonaldland characters had become exceptionally recognizable figures among children, in the same league as Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny. However, their discernible elements were all too recognizable to one TV-producing duo, and the McDonaldland commercials would be subject to a copyright infringement lawsuit of unprecedented proportions. Sid and Marty Krofft were arguably some of the most influential content creators in the world of 70s children's entertainment. The Canadian siblings descended from a long line of puppeteers and developed a successful live puppet musical entitled Les Poupées de Paris, which became the staple of several World's Fairs throughout the 1960s. This led to a stint on The Dean Martin Show, and in September of 1969, the duo's first television production, H.R. Pufnstuf, debuted on CBS. The series was a fantasy set in an immersive world, featuring an evil witch, a talking flute, and H.R. Pufnstuf himself, the titular anthropomorphic dragon who served as mayor of Living Island, the show's fictional setting. 2 mute Keystone cops named Kling and Clang were also featured, and the character of Jimmy was the show's main live-action protagonist. The success of H.R. Pufnstuf in syndication would enable the Krofft brothers to produce more series with similar aesthetics, including Sigmund and the Sea Monster, and Land of the Lost. And in 1970, Marty Krofft was contacted by Needham, Harper, and Steers with the proposition of working with the firm on an ad campaign for McDonald's. According to court records, the firm told the brothers that it was attempting to secure the restaurant chain as a client and wanted to adapt H.R. Pufnstuf characters for the campaign. The Kroffts were to receive a fee for their contribution of character designs and engineering plans. But not long after the initial discussions began, the firm informed the brothers that the campaign had been canceled. In reality, Needham had won a contract with the McDonald's Corporation on June 29th of 1970, withholding this information from the Krofft brothers as they continued discussions through July. After the negotiations were terminated, the firm reportedly hired costume designers and set builders who had previously been employed on H.R. Pufnstuf to work on McDonaldland, and even recruited one of the series' primary voiceover artists to contribute voices for the McDonaldland characters. After the commercials debuted, the Krofft brothers found that many of the companies with which they had licensed their characters to were opting not to renew their contracts, including the Ice Capades, who dropped one of their characters in favor of a McDonaldland character. The brothers officially filed a lawsuit against McDonald's and the advertising firm in September of 1971. Alleging that the ad campaign infringed upon their copyright of the H.R. Pufnstuf television series, as well as various copyrights on spin-off merchandise, asking for $250,000 in damages. As the trial began, jurors were shown several episodes of H.R. Pufnstuf, McDonaldland television commercials, as well as merchandise from both franchises, including toys and games. Under U.S. copyright law, infringement is established upon proof of ownership, access, and substantial similarity. The Kroc brothers did indeed own the copyright for H.R. Pufnstuf, and Needham, Harper, and Steers certainly had access to these characters, as representatives had visited the Krofts' headquarters in Los Angeles during the McDonaldland discussions. The court defined an extrinsic-intrinsic test to determine substantial similarity. The intrinsic portion measures whether an average person would find the total concept and feel of two works to be substantially similar, while the extrinsic portion would entail an objective expert analysis of similarity. The court found that both tests demonstrated substantial similarity. While the defendants listed the differences between the McDonaldland universe and H.R. Pufnstuf, namely minor differences in appearance between McCheese and Pufnstuf, the court rejected this, stating that, quote, "We do not believe that the ordinary reasonable person, let alone a child, viewing these works would even notice that Pufnstuf is wearing a cummerbund while Mayor McCheese is wearing a diplomat's sash." The court instead noted a host of similarities between the two properties, including the fact that McDonaldland and Living Island are both imaginary worlds inhabited by anthropomorphic plants and animals. Both lands have similar landmarks and topography. Both lands feature talking trees with human faces. Both lands are ruled by mayors with disproportionately large heads and wide mouths. Both include Keystone Cop characters. Both feature mad scientist characters and multi-armed evil creatures, and so on and so forth. The court ruled in favor of the Krofts, noting that the total concept and feel of their work had been plagiarized. In 1977, Sid and Marty Krofft were awarded $1,044,000, and the extrinsic-intrinsic test that was developed would go on to be used in courtrooms for years to come to determine substantial similarity in copyright cases. The McDonaldland commercial series continued throughout the late 70s and 80s, but by this time the psychedelic theme song had been dropped in favor of more whimsical instrumental music. Birdie the Early Bird was added to represent the chain's breakfast menu, and many characters, including the Hamburglar and Grimace, were revised to receive new looks. A direct-to-video animated film entitled The Adventures of Ronald McDonald, McDonaldland Treasure Island, was released in 1989, and though some of the McDonaldland characters continued to appear throughout the 90s, many of the ads now took place in the real world, as the immersive world that was McDonaldland began to fade. By the new millennium, McDonald's dominated the fast food market with worldwide reach, but many were beginning to question the overall impact of the chain. By 2004, childhood obesity rates in the U.S. soared to 15%, as children's consumption of fast food had increased five-fold since McDonaldland's debut in the early 70s. As the fast food industry was now pumping billions of dollars into advertising targeting kids, health experts and children's advocacy groups became increasingly critical of this practice, and the release of documentary Super Size Me, as well as the nonfiction book Fast Food Nation, only bolstered these critiques. In response, McDonald's began offering healthier options on its kids' menu, and McDonaldland all but disappeared, save for Ronald McDonald, who still appeared sporadically in commercials, interacting with children in the real world, but mostly appearing as an ambassador for the Ronald McDonald House charity. McDonald's had successfully developed their I'm Lovin' It campaign, which targeted adults, and added items like salad and iced coffee to appeal to the young urban professional crowd. While children were still a critical piece of their consumer base, movie tie-ins and popular animated characters were now being used to woo this demographic, as the idea of using clowns and puppets to appeal to children was becoming increasingly antiquated. The McDonaldland legacy remains complicated by virtue of the Sid and Marty Krofft lawsuit and the fact that many blame the ad campaign for the soaring levels of childhood obesity in the industrialized world. Perhaps the original ad is so appealing because it takes us back to a different time. A time when America was fresh out of the hippie movement and psychedelia had bled into popular culture. A time when American corporations hadn't achieved worldwide monopolistic dominance, but were still actively innovating new ways to appeal to the public. A time when McDonaldland and its eccentric characters represented childhood imagination and wonder, rather than the real-life consequences of consuming vast amounts of unhealthy food. Nevertheless, Ronald McDonald and the rest of the McDonaldland gang will surely remain in the pantheons of pop culture for decades to come. I'm Channel Serfer, and until next time, thanks for watching.